Sarah Williams stood at her bedroom window, watching the rain fall on the small town of Millfield. At 25, she had spent most of her life listening to other people's opinions about what she should do. Her mother wanted her to marry the banker's son. Her friends pushed her toward the successful lawyer who had been asking her out for months. Everyone seemed to have a plan for her life except Sarah herself. The local coffee shop buzzed with the usual morning gossip when Sarah walked in that Tuesday. She had been working there part-time while finishing her teaching degree, saving every penny she could. The bell above the door chimed, and she looked up to see a man in a wheelchair rolling through the entrance. He had kind brown eyes and a gentle smile that immediately caught her attention. "Good morning," he said, maneuvering his wheelchair up to the counter. "Could I get a black coffee and one of those blueberry muffins?" Sarah noticed how politely he spoke and how he made eye contact when talking to her. Most customers barely looked up from their phones. "Of course, that'll be $4.50. "I'm David, by the way," he said, handing her a $5 bill. "I just moved here last week. Still trying to figure out where everything is." "I'm Sarah. Welcome to Millfield. It's not much, but it's home." She prepared his order, stealing glances at him. There was something different about David, something that made her want to know more. David became a regular customer over the next few weeks. He would come in every morning at exactly 8:30, order the same black coffee and blueberry muffin, and always had a kind word for Sarah. She learned that he had moved to Millfield to be closer to his elderly aunt, the only family he had left. He lived in a small apartment above the old bookstore and got around town on a modified bicycle he had built himself. "You built that yourself?" Sarah asked one morning, looking out the window at his unique three-wheeled bike. David's face lit up. "I've always been good with my hands. Had to learn to adapt things after my accident 5 years ago." He didn't seem bitter about it, which surprised Sarah. Most people she knew complained about much smaller problems. Other customers in the coffee shop began to notice Sarah's friendly conversations with David. Mrs. Henderson, the town gossip, made sure to comment loudly about that girl talking to the disabled man every chance she got. Sarah's mother heard the rumors within days. "Sarah, honey, you need to be careful," her mother said during their weekly dinner. "People are talking about you being friendly with that man in the wheelchair. You don't want to give the wrong impression." "What wrong impression, Mom?" "He's a nice person." "I'm sure he is, dear, but you have to think about your future. You can't throw away your chances with someone like Dr. Morrison's son because you feel sorry for someone." Sarah felt her cheeks burn. "I don't feel sorry for him. I enjoy talking to him." Her mother's expression softened slightly. "I just want what's best for you. You're a beautiful, intelligent young woman. You could have any man in this town." But Sarah wasn't interested in any other man in town. She found herself looking forward to David's visits more each day. He told her about the books he loved to read, his passion for fixing broken things, and his dreams of starting his own business someday. Unlike other men who had pursued her, David asked about her goals, her teaching plans, and what she wanted out of life. One rainy Thursday, David didn't come to the coffee shop at his usual time. Sarah found herself watching the door and checking the clock. When he finally arrived at 10:30, his clothes were soaked and he looked frustrated. "Sorry I'm late," he said, shaking rainwater from his jacket. "My bike chain broke, and it took me forever to fix it in this weather." Without thinking, Sarah grabbed a towel from behind the counter. "Here, let me help you dry off. Your coffee's on me today." "You don't have to do that. I want to." She handed him the steaming cup. "Actually, I was worried when you didn't come in at your usual time." David's expression changed, becoming more serious. "Were you really worried about me?" "Yes, I was." Sarah realized she meant it completely. That afternoon, Sarah's best friend Jenny cornered her after her shift ended. "Sarah, what are you doing? Everyone's talking about how you're interested in that disabled guy. His name is David, and I don't care what everyone's talking about. But think about it practically. He can't work a real job, he probably lives on government assistance, and he'll never be able to give you the life you deserve. You're throwing away your future." Sarah stared at her friend. "You don't know anything about him." "I know enough. My cousin lives in his old town. She said he was in some kind of accident and now he can barely take care of himself. Is that really what you want?" That evening, Sarah couldn't stop thinking about what Jenny had said. She barely knew David, really. Maybe everyone was right. Maybe she was being foolish. But when she thought about his smile, his kindness, and how he made her feel like her thoughts and dreams mattered, she couldn't bring herself to care about what others thought. The next morning, David arrived with a small, wrapped package. "I made something for you," he said, looking almost shy. Sarah unwrapped it carefully. Inside was a beautifully carved wooden bookmark with her name etched in elegant letters. The craftsmanship was incredible, with tiny flowers and vines decorating the edges. "David, this is gorgeous. You made this?" "I have a small workshop in my apartment. I like working with wood." He paused. "I noticed you always have a book with you during your breaks." Sarah ran her fingers over the smooth wood, amazed by the detailed work. This wasn't the work of someone who could barely take care of himself. This was the work of someone with real skill and talent. "Thank you," she said softly. "This is the most thoughtful gift anyone has ever given me." As David left that morning, Sarah made a decision. She didn't care what anyone else thought. She was going to get to know David better, and she was going to let him know how much she enjoyed his company. The opinions of a small town weren't going to control her life anymore. Sarah's decision to spend more time with David didn't go unnoticed in Millfield. The town was small enough that everyone seemed to know everyone else's business, and Sarah's growing friendship with David became the hottest topic of conversation at every dinner table and church gathering. "I heard she's actually dating that man," Mrs. Peterson whispered loudly at the grocery store, making sure Sarah could hear as she picked up milk. "Can you imagine? A pretty girl like that throwing her life away." Sarah kept her head high and continued shopping, but inside she felt the sting of judgment. She had asked David to meet her for lunch at the park the previous Sunday, and apparently half the town had witnessed their picnic together. They had talked for hours about books, dreams, and life. David had a way of listening that made Sarah feel heard in a way she had never experienced before. David seemed unaware of the gossip swirling around them, or if he was aware, he didn't let it bother him. He continued his morning visits to the coffee shop, and their conversations grew longer and more personal each day. Sarah learned that David had been studying engineering before his accident, and that he still loved solving complex problems and building things with his hands. "What happened?" Sarah asked one quiet morning when the coffee shop was nearly empty. "Your accident, I mean. You don't have to tell me if you don't want to." David was quiet for a moment, stirring his coffee thoughtfully. "Car accident. Drunk. Driver hit me head-on when I was 21. Doctors said I'd never walk again. Might never live independently." He looked up at her with a sad smile. "Lost my fiancée, too. She said she couldn't handle dating someone in a wheelchair." Sarah felt her heart break a little. "I'm so sorry, David." "Don't be. It taught me who my real friends were, and it made me stronger in ways I never expected." He paused. "Plus, if it hadn't happened, I might never have moved here and met you." Suxel's warmth in his voice made Sarah's cheeks flush. She was falling for David, and she knew it. The problem was, everyone else seemed to know it too, and they all thought she was making a terrible mistake. Sarah's mother invited her for dinner the following week, but when Sarah arrived, she found Dr. Morrison and his son James waiting in the living room. James was handsome, successful, and everything her mother thought Sarah should want in a husband. "Sarah, dear, you remember James," her mother said with a bright smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "He's just finished his residency and will be starting his practice here in Millfield." James stood up and shook Sarah's hand, holding it a little too long. "Sarah, you look beautiful. I was hoping we could finally go out to dinner sometime." "No, you've been busy with work and school." Sarah felt trapped. Her mother was watching expectantly, and James seemed genuinely nice, even if he didn't make her heart race the way David did. "That's very kind of you, James, but I'm seeing someone." Silence in the room was deafening. Her mother's face went pale, then red. "Sarah, honey, we need to talk." After James left, looking confused and disappointed, Sarah's mother confronted her directly. "Please tell me you're not talking about that man in the wheelchair." "His name is David, Mom." "And yes, I am." "Sarah, think about what you're doing. That man can't provide for you. He can't give you children. He can't give you security. He can't give you anything a woman needs from a husband. How do you know what he can or can't do? You've never even met him. I don't need to meet him to know that you're ruining your life." Her mother's voice cracked with emotion. "I've worked so hard to give you opportunities, to help you become someone in this town, and you're going to throw it all away for what? Pity?" "It's not pity, Mom. It's love." The word hung in the air between them. Sarah hadn't meant to say it, but now that she had, she realized it was true. She was in love with David. Her mother sat down heavily in her chair. "Oh, Sarah, what have you done?" Word of Sarah's declaration spread through Millfield like wildfire. By the end of the week, Sarah noticed people crossing the street to avoid talking to her. The coffee shop's regular customers made comments under their breath about "that poor deluded girl" and "what a waste of a good education." Jenny confronted Sarah at the coffee shop during her shift. "Sarah, everyone's talking about you and David. Mrs. Williams called my mom and said you told your mother you love him. Please tell me that's not true." Sarah kept cleaning the espresso machine, not looking up. "What if it is true? Then you've lost your mind. Sarah, he's disabled. He has no money, no job, no future. What kind of life could you possibly have with him?" "A happy one," Sarah said quietly. Jenny threw her hands up in exasperation. "You're not thinking clearly. This isn't some romance novel, Sarah. This is real life. You need someone who can take care of you, not someone you have to take care of." "David doesn't need me to take care of him. He's more independent than half the men in this town." Living in a tiny apartment above a bookstore is independence? Getting around on a homemade bicycle is independence? Sarah, wake up. That evening, Sarah walked to David's apartment for the first time. She climbed the narrow stairs behind the bookstore and knocked on his door. When David opened it, she saw surprise and concern in his eyes. "Sarah? Is everything okay?" She looked past him into his apartment and was amazed by what she saw. The small space was immaculate and well organized. Beautiful wooden furniture filled the room, all clearly handmade. Bookshelves lined the walls, filled with engineering texts, literature, and philosophy books. In one corner was a small but sophisticated workshop area with tools she didn't recognize. "David, did you make all this furniture?" He nodded, looking embarrassed. "I had a lot of time on my hands after the accident. Woodworking helps me think." Sarah walked around the apartment, touching the smooth surfaces of tables, chairs, and shelves. The craftsmanship was incredible, better than anything she had seen in expensive furniture stores. "These are beautiful. You could sell these." "I do sometimes. Custom orders, mostly. It helps pay the bills." Sarah turned to look at him. "David, I need to ask you something. And I want you to be completely honest with me." David wheeled closer to her, his expression serious. "Of course. Everyone in town thinks that you can't provide for yourself, that you live on charity or government assistance. They think I'm throwing my life away by caring about you." David's jaw tightened. "And what do you think?" Sarah looked around the apartment again, taking in the evidence of David's skill, independence, and intelligence. "I think they don't know you at all, but I want to know everything. If we're going to have a relationship, I want to know who you really are, not what people assume about you." David was quiet for a long moment. Then he smiled, the first truly relaxed smile she had seen from him. I was hoping you'd ask. There are some things about me that might surprise you, Sarah. Things I haven't told anyone in this town. David wheeled over to a desk in the corner and pulled out a thick folder. Before I tell you everything, I want you to understand why I haven't shared this with anyone in Millfield. He handed her several official-looking documents. When I moved, here I wanted a fresh start. I wanted people to know me for who I am now, not what I used to be or what I have. Sarah looked at the papers in confusion. They were patent documents, business licenses, and what looked like financial statements. David, I don't understand what I'm looking at. The patents are mine. I've invented and sold the rights to several adaptive devices for people with disabilities. The business license is for my consulting company. I help other companies design accessible products. He paused, watching her face carefully. The financial statements show that I'm doing quite well for myself. Sarah's eyes widened as she scanned the numbers on the bank statements. David, these numbers. This can't be right. It's right. I may not have a traditional job, but I make more money than most people in this town, including Dr. Morrison. David's voice was steady, but Sarah could hear the vulnerability underneath. I live simply because I choose to, not because I have to. Sarah sat down hard in one of his handmade chairs, her mind reeling. Why didn't you tell me this before? Because I wanted to know if you could care about David the man, not David the successful businessman, my ex-fiancée, the one who left after my accident. She came back when she found out about my patents and the money. She said she had made a mistake, that she could handle my disability after all. David's voice turned bitter. But I realized she never cared about me. She cared about what I could give her. Sarah looked up at him, understanding dawning in her eyes. You thought I might be the same way. I hoped you weren't. Everything about you seemed genuine. But I had to be sure. David moved his wheelchair closer to her chair. Sarah, I've been falling in love with you since the first day we met. But I needed to know that you were falling in love with me, too. Not with the idea of rescuing someone or with what I might be able to provide. I am in love with you, Sarah said softly. And it has nothing to do with money or pity or anything else. I love how you listen to me, how you make me laugh, how you see possibilities where other people see problems. David reached out and took her hand. Then there's something else I need to show you. He led her to his computer and opened several files. On the screen were architectural drawings, business plans, and correspondence with investors. Sarah recognized some of the company names as major corporations. I'm not just doing consulting work anymore. I'm starting my own company. We're going to manufacture adaptive equipment and accessible furniture. I already have backing from 3 major investors, and we're planning to build a facility here in Millfield. Sarah stared at the screen, trying to process everything she was learning. You're going to build a factory here? A small one to start. It'll bring about 50 jobs to the town initially, with plans to expand if things go well. David's excitement was evident in his voice. I chose Millfield specifically because it's struggling economically. I want to help this community while building something meaningful. David, this is incredible. But why are you keeping it secret? Because I want to make sure everything is finalized before I announce it. Too many things can go wrong in the early stages of a business. But also, he hesitated. I wanted to see how people really feel about me first. Once they know about the money and the business, their attitudes will change. They'll pretend they never looked down on me. Sarah understood completely. She had seen how people in small towns could be. They would indeed change their tune once they knew David was wealthy and successful. But by then, their true character would have already been revealed. Over the next few weeks, Sarah and David's relationship deepened, while the town's disapproval grew stronger. Sarah's mother stopped speaking to her entirely. Her friends stopped, inviting her to social events. Even her co-workers at the coffee shop made pointed comments about her poor choices. The situation came to a head on a busy Saturday morning. The coffee shop was packed with the usual weekend crowd when David came in for his coffee. As Sarah prepared his order, she could hear the whispered conversations around them. "I can't believe she's still seeing him," Mrs. Henderson said loudly to her companion. "That poor girl is throwing her life away." "Someone should talk sense into her," another voice added. "She's young and naive. She doesn't understand what she's getting herself into." Sarah felt her face burn with embarrassment and anger, but she kept working. David, however, had heard every word. Instead of leaving as he usually did, he turned his wheelchair to face the room. "Excuse me," he said in a clear, calm voice that carried throughout the coffee shop. "I couldn't help but overhear your concerns about Sarah's relationship with me." The room fell silent. Everyone turned to stare at David, clearly uncomfortable at being confronted directly. "I understand that you think Sarah is making a mistake by caring about someone like me. You see the wheelchair and you make assumptions about who I am and what I can offer." David's voice remained steady and polite. "But I think there's something you should know." Sarah watched in amazement as David calmly explained his background as an engineer, his patents, and his successful consulting business. He didn't mention the new factory or the extent of his wealth, but he shared enough to make it clear that he was far from the helpless charity case they had assumed him to be. "The truth is," David concluded, "I could have chosen to live anywhere. I chose Millfield because it seemed like the kind of place where people cared about character more than appearances. I'm beginning to wonder if I was wrong about that." The silence in the coffee shop was deafening. Mrs. Henderson's face had gone pale, and several other customers were staring into their cups, clearly embarrassed by their assumptions. Sarah felt a surge of pride and love for David. He had defended himself with dignity and grace, never raising his voice or showing anger, even though she knew the comments had hurt him. After the customers began filtering out, many avoiding eye contact, Sarah walked around the counter and stood next to David. "That was amazing," she said, quietly. "I probably shouldn't have done that," David admitted, "but I couldn't stand listening to them talk about you that way anymore." "I'm glad you did. People needed to hear it." That afternoon, Sarah made a decision that would change everything. She had been thinking about it for weeks, but David's courage in standing up to the town gossips had crystallized her resolve. She walked to her mother's house and knocked on the front door. "Sarah?" Her mother looked surprised and wary. "I thought you weren't speaking to me." "Mom, we need to talk. And I need you to really listen to me this time." Sarah spent the next hour telling her mother everything she had learned about David. She described his intelligence, his talents, his business success, and his plans for helping Millfield. Most importantly, she explained how David made her feel, valued and respected in a way she had never experienced before. "He doesn't want to change me or control me, Mom. He encourages my dreams. He thinks my teaching career is important and worthwhile. When was the last time any man in this town talked to me about my goals instead of how pretty I look?" Her mother was quiet for a long time after Sarah finished speaking. Finally, she sighed deeply. "I owe you an apology, Sarah, and I owe him one too. I let my fears and this town's prejudices cloud my judgment. Does this mean you'll give him a chance?" "I think it means I'd like to meet the man who's made my daughter so happy," her mother said with a small smile. "Will you bring him for dinner this Sunday?" Sunday dinner at Sarah's mother's house was tense at first, but David's genuine warmth and intelligence quickly won her over. He asked thoughtful questions about her garden, complimented her cooking, and spoke passionately about his plans to help revitalize Millfield's economy. By the end of the evening, Sarah's mother was showing David photo albums and treating him like family. "I was so wrong about you," she admitted as David prepared to leave. "I let fear make me foolish. I hope you can forgive an old woman's prejudice," "There's nothing to forgive, Mrs. Williams," David replied graciously. "You were protecting your daughter. I respect that." Word of Sarah's mother's change of heart spread through Millfield almost as quickly as the original gossip had. Some people began to reconsider their harsh judgments about David, especially after his speech at the coffee shop. Others remained stubbornly convinced that Sarah was making a mistake, regardless of David's qualifications. The turning point came 3 months later when Sarah and David announced their engagement. The reaction was mixed, but Sarah no longer cared about the town's approval. She was marrying the man she loved, and that was all that mattered. Their wedding was small and simple, held in the town's old chapel with only close friends and family in attendance. Sarah wore her grandmother's dress, and David looked handsome in a dark blue suit. Despite the modest celebration, it was the happiest day of both their lives. The newlyweds moved into a larger apartment above the bookstore while they looked for a house to buy. David continued his consulting work and began finalizing plans for his manufacturing company. Sarah finished her teaching degree and got a job at the local elementary school, where she quickly became one of the most beloved teachers in town. 6 months after their wedding, David surprised Sarah with news that would change everything. "The investors have approved the final plans," he announced over dinner one evening. "We're ready to break ground on the factory." "David, that's wonderful. When will you make the announcement?" "Next week. I want to do it right. Maybe hold a town meeting so everyone can ask questions and understand what this means for Millfield." The town meeting was held on a crisp October evening in the community center. Nearly everyone in Millfield attended, curious about the mysterious new business that was supposedly coming to town. David had asked Sarah to keep his involvement secret until the meeting, wanting to surprise everyone. Mayor Thompson introduced the evening by talking about the town's economic struggles and the need for new businesses and jobs. "Tonight we have someone here who wants to help change that," he announced. "Please welcome David Mitchell, who has a proposal that could transform our community." A murmur went through the crowd as David wheeled himself up to the front of the room. Many people looked confused, clearly not understanding why that disabled man would be speaking about economic development. David began by projecting his architectural plans onto a large screen. The proposed factory was beautiful, modern, and designed to blend with Millfield's historic character. He explained that the facility would manufacture adaptive equipment and accessible furniture, products with a growing market demand. "The initial phase will employ 50 people with good wages and benefits," David continued. "These won't be minimum wage jobs. We're looking for skilled workers, and we're prepared to provide training for those who need it. Within 5 years, we plan to expand to 150 employees." Hands shot up around the room as people began asking questions about hiring, wages, and timelines. David answered each question thoroughly and professionally, clearly demonstrating his business expertise. "Now, I know what many of you are thinking," David said, his voice carrying a hint of amusement. "How is the man you've spent the last year feeling sorry for able to start a multi-million-dollar business?" The room fell silent, and several people shifted uncomfortably in their seats. David smiled and clicked to the next slide, which showed his educational background, his patents, and his business credentials. "The truth is, I came to Millfield not because I had to, but because I chose to. I wanted to invest in a community that I thought shared my values of hard work, integrity, and treating people with dignity regardless of their circumstances." Mrs. Henderson, who had been one of David's harshest critics, raised her hand tentatively. "Mr. Mitchell, I owe you an apology. We all do. We judged you unfairly." David's expression softened. "Mrs. Henderson, I don't need apologies. What I hope is that this experience has taught all of us something about the danger of making assumptions, about people based on appearances or circumstances we don't understand." The meeting continued for another hour, with David outlining the factory's environmental safeguards, its commitment to hiring locally, and its potential to attract other businesses to the area. By the time the evening ended, the entire town was buzzing with excitement about the opportunities this new business would bring. As people filed out of the community center, many stopped to shake David's hand and welcome him properly to Millfield for the first time. Some looked embarrassed by their previous behavior, while others seemed genuinely excited to get to know the man they had misjudged so completely. Jenny, Sarah's former best friend who had been so critical of the relationship, approached the couple as they prepared to leave. "Sarah, I need to apologize to both of you. I was wrong about David, and I was a terrible friend to you." Sarah looked at Jenny for a moment, then smiled. "Thank you for saying that, Jenny. It means a lot." "Do you think we could be friends again? I promise I'll never judge your choices like that again." Sarah looked at David, who nodded encouragingly. "I'd like that," she said. The drive home was quiet, both Sarah and David processing the evening's events. Finally, Sarah broke the silence. "How do you feel about tonight?" "Relieved, mostly," David admitted. "It's been hard keeping so much secret for so long, but also a little sad." "Sad? Why?" "Because now everyone will treat us differently. They'll pretend they never looked down on us, never whispered behind our backs. Their kindness will be based on what I can do for this town, not on who we are as people." Sarah reached over and took his hand. "But we know who our real friends are now. The people who stood by us when they thought you were just a poor man in a wheelchair. Those are the people who matter." David squeezed her hand. "You're right. And we know something else, too." "What's that?" "We know that our love is real. It wasn't based on money or status or what other people thought. We fell in love with each other when the whole world was telling us we were making a mistake." As they pulled into their driveway, Sarah felt a deep sense of contentment. The hardest part of their journey was behind them. Now they could focus on building their life together and helping to build a stronger, more prosperous Millfield. But David had one more surprise in store, something that would shock the town even more than his business success had. Something that would make Sarah's heart soar with pride and love, and would cement David's place as not just a successful businessman, but as one of the most remarkable men anyone in Millfield had ever encountered. The next morning, David received a phone call that would change everything once again. As he listened to the voice on the other end, his expression grew more and more amazed. When he hung up, he turned to Sarah with tears in his eyes. "That was the governor's office," he said, his voice shaking with emotion. "There's something I need to tell you about what's going to happen next week." Sarah stared at David, her heart pounding from the emotion in his voice. "David, what's wrong? You're scaring me." David wheeled closer to her, taking her hands in his. "Nothing's wrong, Sarah. Everything is more right than I ever dreamed possible." He took a shaky breath. "That phone call was about an award I was nominated for months ago. I never thought I'd actually win, so I didn't mention it to anyone." "What kind of award?" "The State Innovation Award for Outstanding Contribution to Accessibility Technology. It's given to people who have made significant advances in helping people with disabilities live more independent lives." David's voice grew stronger as he continued. "My patents and designs have apparently helped thousands of people across the country. The governor wants to present the award to me personally next Friday." Sarah felt tears spring to her eyes. "David, that's incredible. Why didn't you tell me you were nominated?" "Because I've learned not to count on things until they happen. Too many disappointments in the past." He smiled softly. "But there's more. The award comes with a $50,000 grant to continue my research, and the governor wants to use my story as an example of how state support for disability services can lead to innovation and economic growth. They want to use your story. They want to feature my journey from the accident through building my business. It means interviews, maybe even a documentary. My story would be shared statewide, possibly nationally." David paused, watching Sarah's face carefully. "Are you okay with that?" with everyone knowing our business?" Sarah laughed through her tears. "David, I'm proud of you. I want everyone to know how amazing you are." The news of David's award spread through Millfield like wildfire, but this time, the gossip was filled with pride and amazement rather than judgment. People who had barely acknowledged David's existence 6 months earlier were now bragging to friends in other towns about having a state award winner living in their community. The coffee shop where Sarah had worked became an unofficial gathering place for people wanting to share stories about David. Mrs. Henderson, now one of his biggest supporters, regaled anyone who would listen with tales of David's kindness and intelligence. "I always knew there was something special about that young man," she claimed, conveniently forgetting her previous attitudes. "The way he spoke to people, so polite and thoughtful. I could tell he was destined for great things." Sarah, who overheard this conversation while picking up coffee for David, had to bite her tongue to keep from laughing. But she was learning that people's ability to rewrite their own memories was less important than their willingness to change their behavior moving forward. The day of the awards ceremony arrived with great fanfare. The governor's office had arranged for local media to cover the event, and several news crews descended on Millfield to interview residents about their hometown hero. The town's new attitude toward David was on full display as everyone competed to give the most glowing quotes about him. Sarah accompanied David to the state capitol for the ceremony, wearing a beautiful blue dress that David had insisted on buying for her. As they sat in the ornate government building waiting for David's name to be called, Sarah felt overwhelmed with pride and love. "Ladies and gentlemen," the governor announced from the podium, "our next recipient represents the very best of innovation, born from adversity." David Mitchell's story begins with a tragic accident that could have ended his dreams. Instead, it became the catalyst for inventions that have improved the lives of thousands of people with disabilities across our state and beyond. As David wheeled up to the podium to accept his award, the entire audience rose in a standing ovation. Sarah watched through tears as the governor shook David's hand and presented him with a crystal trophy and an oversized check for the research. "Grant, Mr. Mitchell," the governor said into the microphone, "would you like to say a few words?" David adjusted the microphone and looked out at the crowd, his eyes finding Sarah in the audience before he began to speak. "Thank you, Governor Martinez, for this incredible honor. 5 years ago, when I was lying in a hospital bed being told I would never walk again, I thought my life was over. I thought I had nothing left to contribute to the world." David's voice was steady but filled with emotion. "I was wrong about many things back then, but mostly I was wrong about what defines a person's worth." He paused, looking directly at Sarah. "I've learned that our value isn't measured by what we can't do, but by what we choose to do with what we have. Every invention I've created, every patent I've filed, every job my company will provide in Millfield exists because I stopped focusing on my limitations and started focusing on possibilities." The audience was completely silent, hanging on every word. But the most important thing I want to share today isn't about technology or business success. It's about the people who see potential where others see problems. My wife Sarah believed in me when everyone around her said she was making a mistake. She saw the man I could become, not the man I used to be or the limitations I faced. David's voice broke slightly. "This award belongs as much to her as it does to me. Because love and belief are the greatest innovations of all. They have the power to transform not just individuals, but entire communities." The applause was thunderous and sustained. Sarah wiped tears from her cheeks as she watched David handle the media interviews that followed with grace and intelligence. Reporter after reporter asked about his inventions, his business plans, and his future goals. "What's next for you, Mr. Mitchell?" asked a reporter from the state's largest newspaper. "We're breaking ground on our manufacturing facility in Millfield next month. But beyond that, I'm working on something even more exciting. I'm developing a program to teach adaptive design in high schools across the state. I want to inspire the next generation of innovators to see accessibility not as an afterthought, but as a design principle that makes products better for everyone. The drive back to Millfield that evening was filled with phone calls from local officials, business leaders, and reporters wanting to schedule interviews. David's story was already being picked up by national news outlets, and the phone in their apartment wouldn't stop ringing. "I can't believe this is happening," Sarah said as they finally settled down for the evening. "6 months ago, people in this town looked at you with pity. Now you're going to be famous." David laughed, pulling her close to him on the couch. "Famous or not, nothing changes what's important. We have each other, we have work that matters, and we have a community that's learning to see people differently." "Speaking of the community," Sarah said with a mischievous smile, "Jenny called while you were doing interviews. She wants to know if you need a marketing manager for the new company." "What did you tell her?" "That she'd have to prove she's qualified for more than just being my friend." "But I think she's genuinely changed, David. People can grow." David nodded, thoughtfully. "Maybe we should give her a chance. This whole experience has taught me that everyone deserves an opportunity to show who they really are." The weeks following the awards ceremony brought a whirlwind of activity to Millfield. Construction began on David's factory, creating immediate jobs and bringing new energy to the town. Property values started rising as people from neighboring cities began moving to Millfield, attracted by the economic opportunities and the story of the community's transformation. Local businesses that had struggled for years suddenly found themselves busy again. The bookstore below David and Sarah's apartment became a popular stop for visitors wanting to see where the famous inventor lived. The coffee shop where Sarah had worked was featured in several newspaper articles about the town's renewal, but perhaps the most significant change was in how people treated each other. The experience of having been so wrong about David had humbled many residents and made them more cautious about rushing to judgment. The town became more welcoming to newcomers and more supportive of people who were different or struggling. Sarah started a support group for families dealing with disabilities, using David's story to show that limitations didn't have to define anyone's future. The group met weekly in the community center and quickly became one of the most well-attended programs in town. 3 months after the award ceremony, David received another surprise phone call. This time it was from a major television network, wanting to feature his story in a documentary about overcoming adversity and changing communities. "They want to film here in Millfield," David told Sarah excitedly. "They want to interview you, your mother, people from the town. They want to show the whole transformation, not just my part of it." Sarah felt a flutter of nervousness. "Will they want to talk about how people treated us before?" "Probably. But I think that's important, don't you? If our story can help other communities be more accepting, if it can help other people not give up on love because of what others think, then it's worth sharing the difficult parts too." The documentary crew arrived in Millfield on a sunny spring morning, exactly 1 year after David had first entered the coffee shop. As Sarah watched them set up their equipment in the town square, she marveled at how much everything had changed. The shy young woman who had been afraid to stand up to small-town gossip was now confident enough to share her story with the world. The man everyone had pitied was now a respected business leader and community hero. The town that had been dying economically was now thriving and growing. But most importantly, Sarah thought as she watched David discussing camera angles with the film crew, they had built a love story that had not only survived the worst that people could say about it, but had actually grown stronger because of the challenges they had faced together. As the cameras began rolling for their first interview, Sarah reached over and took David's hand. Whatever came next, they would face it together, just as they had faced everything else. And that, she knew, was the real secret to their success. The documentary, Love Without Limits, The Millfield Story, premiered 6 months later to national acclaim. The film followed David and Sarah's journey from their first meeting through the town's economic transformation, but it also captured something deeper about human nature, prejudice, and the power of love to change communities. Sarah watched the premiere at the newly renovated Millfield Theater, surrounded by family, friends, and neighbors. As her own image appeared on screen talking about falling in love with David, despite everyone's disapproval, she felt a profound sense of gratitude for the journey they had taken together. The documentary's impact was immediate and far-reaching. Within weeks of its release, Millfield became a destination for visitors wanting to see the town that had learned to look beyond appearances. The mayor's office was flooded with requests from other struggling communities wanting to know how they could attract businesses like David's. More importantly, the film sparked conversations across the country about disability, love, and the assumptions people make about others. Support groups began forming in cities nationwide, using David and Sarah's story as inspiration for their own advocacy work. "I never imagined our story would reach so many people," Sarah confided to David. One evening as they walked through the town square, the area had been beautifully renovated with accessible pathways and benches, funded partially by tourism revenue from visitors to their now famous town. "Neither did I," David replied, pausing to adjust his jacket against the cool evening air. "But I'm glad it has. If even one couple decides not to give up on love because of what other people think, then everything we went through was worth it." They stopped in front of the bronze plaque that the town had installed to commemorate the factory's groundbreaking. The facility was now employing over 80 people and had a waiting list of companies wanting to partner with David's innovative designs. "Mr. and Mrs. Mitchell," called a voice behind them. They turned to see Mayor Thompson approaching with a broad smile. "I wanted to let you know that the State Tourism Board just approved our application for historic designation. Millfield is officially being recognized as a community of transformation because of the changes that have happened here." Sarah squeezed David's hand. The designation would bring additional funding for community development and would help ensure that the town's newfound prosperity would be sustainable for years to come. "There's something else," Mayor Thompson continued, looking almost embarrassed. "The town council voted unanimously to rename the main street Mitchell Boulevard in honor of what you've both done for our community." David looked stunned. "That's not necessary, Mayor Thompson. We didn't do this for recognition." "I know you didn't, and that's exactly why you deserve it. You've shown us what it means to see potential where others see problems, to invest in people and places that others have written off." As the mayor walked away, Sarah and David continued their evening stroll, past the thriving shops and restaurants that had reopened thanks to the town's economic revival. Children played in the newly renovated park, their laughter echoing through the streets that had once been quiet with despair. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you hadn't come to Millfield?" Sarah asked as they reached their apartment building. David considered the question seriously. "I think we were meant to find each other, Sarah. Maybe not in this exact way, but somehow. What we have is too strong to have been accidental." Inside their apartment, Sarah found a thick envelope that had been slipped under their door. The return address showed it was from Harvard University's School of Engineering. David opened it with curiosity, then his eyes widened in amazement. "They want me to give a guest lecture series on adaptive design," he said, scanning the letter. "They're offering to create a fellowship program based on my work, where engineering students would spend a semester in Millfield learning hands-on about accessible innovation." "David, that's incredible. You'd be teaching at Harvard." "We'd be teaching at Harvard," David corrected. "They want both of us. They want to include your work with the Disability Support Group as part of the program. They think the combination of technical innovation and community building is exactly what future engineers need to learn." Sarah felt tears of joy welling up in her eyes. When she had fallen in love with David, she had thought she was choosing a quiet life in a small town with a man everyone else had overlooked. Instead, she had found herself part of a story that was inspiring people across the country and opening doors to opportunities she had never dreamed possible. 6 months later, Sarah stood in a Harvard lecture hall, looking out at 60 eager engineering students who had come to learn about designing for accessibility. Next to her, David was explaining how his accident had led him to see design challenges from an entirely new perspective. The most important thing you can learn, David told the students, is that accessible design isn't just about helping people with disabilities. When you design for accessibility from the beginning, you create products that work better for everyone. After the lecture, a young woman approached them. She was in a wheelchair and her eyes were bright with excitement. "Professor Mitchell, I just wanted to thank you. I'm a first-year student, and until I heard about your program, I wasn't sure I belonged in engineering. Your story has shown me that my perspective as someone with a disability isn't a limitation. It's an advantage." Sarah watched David's face light up with pride and purpose. This was why their story mattered, why all the judgment and criticism they had endured had been worth it. They weren't just building a business or revitalizing a town. They were changing how people thought about disability, love, and human potential. That evening, as they walked through Harvard Yard hand in hand, Sarah reflected on the incredible journey that had brought them to this moment. The shy coffee shop worker and the man everyone had pitied were now respected professors inspiring the next generation of innovators. "Do you remember what you told me that first day you showed me your apartment?" Sarah asked. "You said there were things about you that might surprise me?" David laughed. "I had no idea how much we would surprise ourselves, let alone everyone else." "What do you think comes next for us?" David stopped walking and turned to face her, his expression serious but filled with love. "I think we keep doing what we've always done. We keep believing in each other. We keep looking for ways to help people. And we keep proving that love really can change the world." As they continued their walk through the prestigious university campus, Sarah marveled at how far they had come from that small coffee shop in Millfield. But she also knew that no matter how successful they became or how many lives they touched, the most important thing would always be the love they had built together in the face of everyone's doubts. Their story had become a testament to the power of seeing beyond appearances, of choosing love over conformity, and of believing in possibilities that others couldn't see. Most importantly, it had shown that sometimes the people everyone else overlooks are exactly the ones who have the power to change everything. The documentary had called them a love without limits, but Sarah knew the truth was even simpler than that. They had just been two people brave enough to follow their hearts, and that courage had transformed not only their own lives, but an entire community and everyone who heard their story. Years later, when people asked Sarah what advice she would give to someone facing opposition for their choices in love, she would always say the same thing. Trust your heart, not the crowd. The people who truly matter will support you, and the people who don't support you don't truly matter. Love has a way of proving itself to be right, even when everyone else thinks it's wrong.